heard three different perspectives on the same issue of globalization and its effect on women. Now you have questions, and the panelists will try to address your questions. But I think what they said about the body image, and also what Radhika said about psyche, reminds me of something when my daughter was small. I came home one day, and there are 5 kids lying on my driveway on towels, and my daughter is one of them. And I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We are tanning." And you know, my unconscious reaction was, "Mira, why are you tanning?" And I said to her, and I have to say it in Punjabi because that's what I use. I said, "Kali shah ho jayegi." That means you will turn really dark black. And she stood up and said to me, "I'm Gambhir, I'm not Shah." Shah is a caste like man. She says, "I'm Gambhir, I'm not a Shah. And lying here will not make me that." So you can see how we have to change our own psyche about things, and then the changes can occur. So it's open. Anybody wants to?
I just want a reaction to those of us in the present globalization who cross racial, cultural, and religious lines in marriage. What do we do with those people? I am a product of that. My father was here before and gave a talk. My father is Bengali Indu and my mother is Slovak. So there you are, and I'm white. Now, there are many of us doing this, and I could suggest to you that this generation that is here, not the ones that first came to Canada, those marriages were no problem. They went the traditional way. But now we're beginning to see some of us going into that phase. And we are the mystery. For some reason, nobody knows who we are. So we're Heinz 57, that's good. Thank you.
Just be democratic.
I'd like to have a real reaction from the women as women. What does that mean? Is there any meaning to that kind of a relationship?
Well, first, I would say first that what you're speaking about is not the exception but the norm. So the notion of purity is a construction. I think that is an act to set boundaries.
Right.
So, and I would say that the kind of reality you're speaking about has been always the norm in humanity. Humanity has always been mixing and matching and crossing boundaries.
Good.
And the reason why the chastity is very important is to suppress those crossing boundaries. So it's the norm. And when you see that it's rejected, it is through power relations.
Actually, I also add to that within India, one of the important ways that we can address gender inequality is to encourage intercaste marriages,
Right.
interreligious marriages, and so on, so that everything becomes blurred and people will start developing norms behavior and so on. Yeah.
Well, I can answer this from personal experience because both my children have married outside. They have married non-Indians. And so my grandsons are, I don't know what to call them, but I think that they'll grow up with I hope with the best of both worlds, because I certainly am not going to teach them the bad things that, because each culture has its own pros and cons. So I will teach them only the pros of our Hindu tradition, and they will learn only the pros from their mother's tradition.
Thank you.
And I think, in fact, probably they'll create a super race. No prejudice. No prejudice. Question there?
I just want to make a comment rather than being this or that. I take pride, I'm not an offspring of mixed marriages or anything. In that sense, I'm a purist, yes. But I take pride in calling myself a world citizen, and I hope that globalization would have that good effect on the, not only on women, but on everyone to develop that outlook, that people have a restricted kind of thing, and I know it has an impact in various ways, certainly on the, not only lower class, but the poorer, be it in China or India, that they work in sweatshops and they don't get a benefit. However, the middle class has always been emancipated in India, and I'm proud to be, we were always the middle class and always educated. I was surprised when for women entering medical school, whereas it was open competition. Even I'm almost 74, and there was open competition by the time my sister had entered. There were 50% girls in my medical school, so that was one. The other thing I do want to comment on, I'm sorry I didn't get your name, but the young PhD student.
Amina. Because I opened the door for myself. Amina.
And I would say that being white or light has always been present in the Indian culture. Look at the mythology. They use turmeric, maybe they have more chemical product. This is nothing new. That's not the globalization. They're using different. No, I'm sure you know of that. And I'm not taking that hopefully out of context, but I do want that has always been, being lighter was part of something, you know, just like
here also cheeses and Mire, you see Mire of cheeses is also pure white, but also socially tanning evolved. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not a essentialist. In my view, I'm more Foucauldian. How do I say it? I look at emergence. In other words, purity of a virginal Victorian look. It's still the norm in Christian mythology, but yet the tan look is okay. So what I'm interested in is one should not always focus on essential past. One have to look at powers at work in a particular historical moment.
Just a comment. Maybe it wasn't meant that way, but just in the beginning when you made the presentation, when you started the introduction, it appeared that globalization is not necessarily positive. It is true that there are some negative impact of globalization, but one of the most important things is that for poverty reduction, for equality, equity, you would need globalization and economic growth. I do not equate economic growth with economic development. Economic growth is necessary for economic development, but it's not sufficient. And you require conditions. You did mention some of those conditions. Conditions are required whereby you try to temper some of the negative impact of globalization. And there are many positive impacts, as you have mentioned yourself in your longer presentation. So, I would like people not to go away with the impression that globalization is something necessarily bad. And some of the issues that you mentioned, yes, structural adjustment, structural reforms did have some impact, but then those are also important. Today, India is one of the I would say it's one of the Asian giants, rising giants, together with China, and it wouldn't have happened without the globalization. It is important that you try to also look at economic development together with globalization, and it takes time, and maybe it is not looked at appropriately yet in India, but globalization is necessary and important.
Can I say something to that? Whether we are pro or anti-globalization doesn't really matter, because globalization is here to stay. You can't reverse the process. So we have to find ways of coming to terms with it. And
okay, I'd like to respond to that. Yes, if you want to go ahead.
No, I want to say you mentioned India and China, but I just want to add a little, especially. I mean, globalization is not a new phenomenon. It's been always going. But I think what people are talking about is a heightened form of globalization and the way it impacts differentially in a different local society. So let's take the case of China. China might be rising, but China is also becoming an extremely negative influence in Africa. Places like Ogaden, there is a genocide going on at this very moment, where the Red Cross have been kicked out of Ogaden, and China has an oil deal in Somalia. China is involved in hiring mercenaries and made an oil deal with the warlords. My 75-year-old mother today is in hiding. Can you believe this?
I think we are diversing from the issue. We are diversing from the issue. Issue here is women and globalization and impact. And
she's not diverting. Actually, what she's saying is that her mother is hiding because, what I have argued, it is in such a brief time, I cannot present a critique of globalization. I am not supportive of the style of globalization that's going on, in spite of whatever is happening in India, precisely because of the kind of impact Amina mentioned.
But the source for it is the globalization, that is the fact.
Yeah, you see, it is the kind of economic hegemony, global economic hegemony, concentration of powers among the corporations that has led to the kind of negative consequences. That's what I'm talking about. You see, globalization, nobody is against technology, nobody is against international trade, but we are against exploitation and also concentration of power in a few hands who can sort of do that kind of havoc Amina mentioned in Somalia and different places. And also, talking about India itself, the kind of disparity that in income that has taken place in India is inexcusable. The number of farmer suicides that's going on and so much devastation that's going on in India, it cannot be tolerated. That we do need economic development, but not at the cost of people, so many people. We cannot do that. That's what's happening. No, you did not say that. We did not say that. What I'm saying is, the kind of corporate globalization that's going on, it is the result of that. Not blaming anybody here. You see, what I'm pointing is the kind of globalization that's going on leads to these kinds of efforts. But I agree with Radhika that globalization probably is here to stay. But it doesn't have to be in that form. That is part of the effort of the World Social Forum. That's why I mentioned World Social Forum. Many scholars from around the world are discussing alternative ways of economic development, and there are many theories being developed. And people are not aware of it, and we need to become more aware of it. Instead of thinking this is the only way, we have to start thinking there are many other ways of doing it.
I'm a physician, so I'm going to put my physician hat. Whenever there is something, you start looking at the causes, you start looking at the possible solutions, and you start looking at the benefit of medicine you're going to give, and whether giving the medicine is going to be more useful than watching for a while is going to be useful. So I think in the world of globalization, what we're discussing here today is how it is affecting both ways, positive ways, and some negative things are also emerging. And each and every country and each and every individual will have to look at it and say, okay, how can I look at it and how can I make it better or change it? I was in Africa and I've seen the devastation there, but I would not say that it's all because of globalization. And that brings me back. I was in Africa and somebody asked me a question. If all men were killed today, would the human race survive? So you want to think, will the human race survive if all men were killed at 1 minute?
Men were killed.
All men were killed. And the answer was yes, the human race will survive because some of the women are going to be pregnant. The women are very resilient and will survive. So, you have any more questions?
I had a comment about negative aspects.
We freeze some sperms and we don't even eat them for it.
I think globalization has brought a lot of benefits to it. Not least, for example, outsourcing. Outsourcing, I think, has brought millions of women into the workforce because I think disproportionately more women take these jobs. That I think is also something. Apart from that, I think the status of women would depend really on political empowerment and economic empowerment. Political empowerment, I think, in Rajiv Gandhi's time, we had this law that panchayats would have 1/3 women, and that is a legal requirement. And that, I think, today, after 15-20 years, has certainly empowered women. Second is on the economic empowerment side. Of course, this Gambhir, the experiment of changing the focus of economic empowerment of the man to control. I think that's very important. That's a movement which is picked up considerably in India. And finally, I think I would like to mention that Mayawati has now been elected Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, which is 170 million people. If it was independent, it would be the 6th largest country in the world. She is a woman, she's a Dalit. She's been elected for the 4th time as Chief Minister, and surely that means something in the Uttar Pradesh.
And to add to that, also, if you look at Kerala, Kerala is a real success story. I was going to present my data on Kerala, but there's 90% literacy, and so the Kerala experience is worth looking at.
I think the change we expect very fast in this era of technology, and before this technology, the changes were happening were slow and we accepted it. Now we are seeing changes very fast. I was reading somewhere the other day, and the students who are going to university today will not know that there was no cell phone. So you can see in all this small time how much technology has changed our world. And with the changing world is also our expectations have changed. We want things to happen faster. So we have to put a little bit things in context, whether the changes are occurring at the pace we want it to be, or changes are not occurring at all.
You want me to respond to what he...
Yes, please do.
Oh, I agree with you completely. There was not enough time to present all the achievements. You appreciate it because of shortage of time. I did refer to how middle class people have benefited. My argument is not all castes and all classes have benefited. The rural-urban differences have intensified, and disparity of income has increased. There's a lot of evidence to show that. My argument is, if we can find a better way where we can spread the wealth rather than having a process where the wealth gets accumulated in a few hands, we should be looking at it more carefully. That's what the World Social Forum is doing. You had a question, I think.
Yes, but of course, not surprisingly, the High Commissioner has preempted me. Specifically to do with the question of the reserve seats. It was actually because of the comment made structural changes that need to develop within the family. But there are two structural changes going on now. One is in part because of globalization, and that's the economic transformation, and particularly the IT sector, which is a pure meritocracy. And I've been spending, the last 10, 12 years, I've been trying to get my students, somebody, to take a look at a very close examination of the impact on the social structure of the rise of a meritocracy in the South. What does it do to caste? What does it do to gender? What does it do to class? And I have yet to see any research. I was going to ask these researchers if they had any knowledge of studies that can tell us what's happening to gender relations, caste or class relations, as a result of the emergence of meritocracy in the IT sector. The second question is specifically, I wanted their opinion of the reserve seat policy. Is it a good thing? Has it worked as we hoped? As you know, a third of the seats, which is an enormous social experiment. We know we have some studies of this already done. The term proxy women has come to the fore, but I wanted the cutting-edge researchers who care about gender relations in India to perhaps comment on that aspect.
IT, none of us, I don't think, have done any work on IT, but I do know that there is a connection between the IT focus and outsourcing back into developed nations. And it's most likely it's the men that are going overseas, not the women. So I would assume that the disparity will not change in terms of the IT in India is very much one of the globalized export commodity. In other words, you see the whole IT visas. So I think I would, if I do research today, I will see gender disparity still there. There will be more men than women because the IT, again, is one of the interesting things in terms of production of education, investment in the US. IT is an area, even the Germans changed their laws to open up, to procure an IT trained Indians back into Germany. So the whole IT is connected to, again, a globalization from the developed nations. So it's connected really in kind of globalized. And so I would still say one would find a gender disparity, but I have not done, but I'm using kind of logical analysis of what I'm familiar with.
Within India itself, actually there is evidence to show that women in the upper middle and middle classes are benefiting as much as men are. They have access to education opportunities and employment opportunities and so on. So in middle classes, actually, they have very good access. Gender equality in terms of, well, as I pointed out in my presentation, what's happening is that getting an education, getting a job is okay, but they should not forget their core Indian values. That is where the problem the middle class women there are facing. With regard to political reservation with 1/3 in local government structures, that has had revolutionary impact on gender relations in villages to some extent because this is a very new experience because these women are coming out of the home for the first time because they are required to, see, because 1/3 of the panchayat has to be women and so on and so forth. I want to sort of draw upon my own research on one all-woman panchayat in Karnataka. And these women, in this particular village, the village itself decided to give women a chance. Because of the particular initiative of one of the NGOs, they convinced the villagers to give women of the village a chance because the panchayats in that village for a period of time had not achieved well. So when these women took over, everybody expected them to fail. And they all thought that when they gave them, actually many men said, they thought that they will sort of say that they cannot do it, they'll go home and then we'll take over. But they all surprised them. For 4 years, they did such a tremendous job for the village, and actually it made the men in the village anxious, as the men themselves said it. And then everybody wanted to extend the period for the second term, but the men ruled it out. I mean, Anish said, no more. You see, we have to take over. You see, that we have given you a chance for 4 years, that's enough. What I'm suggesting here is, women have shown that they can do the job. So the myth of women are incompetent is exploded. And so women are also exploded the myth that they don't want to do this job. Many of these women wanted to do it for the second time. So they were so enthusiastic and so on. They exploded that myth also. But on the other hand, with regard to whether they will be allowed to do it, that is the crucial point here. This is where I talked about the importance of the family, families acting as states within states, and how family support is crucial for women to come out and participate. If family supports, women can go and participate, but that is not happening in all cases. It is happening in cases where they have support. That's the point. So many studies on Panchayat Raj show that wherever women have support of men in their families, men in their communities, they are doing well. But if it is not there, they cannot.
I have a very quick one. From what I'm hearing presenters say today is that the secondary status of women is very deeply ingrained in our psyche, in our Hindu culture, in our family and social structures. So, since we are talking of globalization, is your view then that globalization and opening up to other cultures, other ways of thinking, other ways of, other societies where women have different status, is it going to be good for us or bad for us? Is it going to help us change this ingrained position, or is it not going to help us change this? That is the issue. That's what globalization must mean.
You see, on the one hand, I think logically, it should help, it should bring in new ideas, and then it should lead to significant change in orientations. But on the other hand, drawing upon my own research and what I have read and so on,